Alright, so this is episode 7 of the drift car build. Okay, so the story behind this episode is I'm going to do a little shakedown of the car in the canyon, which basically I was planning to go to the track that week. So what I wanted to do, or actually what my cousin was telling me to do because he was in the car with me, he's like, oh, let's go to the canyon. You've never been to the canyon in your car. So let's go over there, do a little test of it, so that way when you go to the track, you're not driving all the way over there, then something bad happens. So we're doing I'm just doing grip driving in the canyon, just spirited grip driving, and of course this car has a welded diff in it. Still, it was hooking up perfectly fine. So anyways, I'm driving in the canyon. I do maybe like 3 or 4 runs, which maybe is like 15 minutes or 20 minutes worth of driving. No big deal, not really going hard, just kind of throwing it around and seeing what it's doing. Not drifting either. Remember that, because I don't like, doing that type of stuff on the street. So I go ahead, and on the last run, of course it is the last run, because this is what happens. I'm driving, and then all of a sudden, big plume of smoke coming out the back of the car. Just like, coming out the back. And I am flipping out in the car, saying a whole bunch of words I probably shouldn't say. But I'm like screaming in the car because I think, something happened to the engine. And of course, this is going to keep me from going to the track and this and that. All these things are running through my head. So I run up to the top of the canyon, stop the car, check it out. And it turns out that the diff just spewed a whole bunch of oil. And when it spewed all that oil, it went over my hot exhaust. And then, of course, that made all that smoke come out. So really, it was just the diff that was leaking somehow. And it sprayed all over the exhaust. Well, anyways, so drove the car home, and then that's where this episode begins. So remember, my diff, the drain plug, looks like it came loose and dumped a whole bunch of oil when I was driving. So today I'm going to put more oil in there, hopefully get the car back up and running again. So, yep. See that bolt looks. At least when we first looked at it, it looked like silver on the, yeah, you can see the silver right there. Looks like it came unscrewed a little bit. The gasket all the way around, seems like it was fine. It still looks like it's okay. And I'm pretty sure that was just caused from the oil dripping. Right there. So I'm pretty sure the culprit is that bolt. I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up and we'll see what's up. Alright, so now begins the process of trying to find out where the leak is on the diff exactly. So in order to do that, I needed to drain the diff, then go ahead and clean it up, then fill it back up with fluid, and then once it's filled up with fluid, I can see where exactly there are wet spots on the diff, and then that'll basically tell me where the leak was coming from. So, whether it was just a little loose bolt, something like that. Anyways, first thing to do was drain the diff, and that's where the fun begins. Okay. 240s come with, magnetic drain plugs. Okay. This is on the drain plug. Okay, look at this. That's a chunk. Okay. Full chunk. I don't know if that's, maybe it looks like weld on there. This is a chunk right here. Why are these balls? There's just like balls in here. I can't tell if it's weld or if it's something from the diff. The rest is just metal. And I wiped this against my pants, and dude, there are like, it looks like freaking lowrider paint job. Like, that's how much flake is in this. But the whole side area, all metal. This is basically. Okay. So ridiculous. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and put this back in the car, and then I'm gonna lower the car back down to basically so that way it's level and I can fully drain out that diff. And then I'm gonna take out the bolts again, and then I'll finish draining it, and then when I do that, I'll jack it back up and then fill it back up with the oil. I'm gonna go ahead and fill up the diff. The oil I'm using, this is Valvoline 80W90, just a regular, it's a non-synthetic. Okay, and it takes about 1.5 liters or quarts. I always forget, but they're always about the same. So this is 1 quart is 0.946 liters, so they're the same anyways. Doesn't really make difference too much to me. So I gotta fill this up with 1.5 to the diff of quarts/liters. Okay, so the diff is now filled in with fluid and everything basically cleaned up, so I can see where the leak is coming from. The main drain plug right here, that one I had to undo with the breaker bar, so it didn't seem like that one was the loose one where it could have been leaking from. The gasket on the bottom here, also good condition, so it doesn't seem like it would be leaking from there. When I look at all the pictures, it seems like this bolt seems to be pretty wet, so I think the leak is coming from this bolt. But yeah, here, like, even look right now, you can tell it's already just a little bit wet. You go to this bolt, pretty dry. So I'm pretty sure the leak is coming from that bolt. I don't know where though, because it's kind of weird that it's coming from the bolt. It has gasket and everything. There also looked to be a crack on this side, the diff cover, but didn't seem to be leaking from there. And then also there's a big chunk missing right there, but that also didn't seem to be having any effect on it. So I'm pretty positive the leak is coming from this bolt. Now I hadn't quite figured out where the leak was on the diff, so I decided to take out the diff and then find out exactly where the leak was and then go about fixing it. I really don't want to show because I kind of want to get it done because I'm actually like pretty rushed to do stuff right now. But basically there's 4 bolts right here that hold that back cover on and the diff. Up front, of course, you have the drive shaft, and then you also have the 2 bolts that hold the front of the diff in. And then of course each of the axles, which have 6 bolts on each end, and then after that I'm just going to drop it down. So alright, then I'll update you and see what happens. Okay, so the diff is removed now. It took about 2 hours. Okay, I removed part of the exhaust. That's like the whole section right there. Okay, and then also the axles, and then I also disconnect the sway bar just so that way I can flex it down a little bit. See, it's disconnected over there. Just so I can flex it down a little bit, so in order to get the front of the diff to clear. Now let's look at the wonderful diff. That's nice. So when I took it down off the car, okay, this piece was like right there, and I was like, what is that? And I took it, it's a chunk there. And it looks, there's some gear back there, and there's scratch marks on this. I don't know what that's for. I mean, I don't know if it hit. Maybe you switch the cover from something else. I'm not too much into diffs on S13s because it doesn't really matter to me. You just gotta weld it and it's good. And now I'm gonna cover this back up. I'm gonna wash the whole thing before I take it apart, and then we're gonna see what's exactly wrong with it. Then I had to remove the back cover of the diff in order to check things out, as well as to replace, of course, and then reseal the back of the diff. Yeah, buddy. There. And as you can see from the back right here, something definitely hit that and scored it, and it looks like that big old gear inside the diff is that one. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. Well, at this point, I still hadn't quite figured out what exactly went wrong with the diff, but I did know I needed a new back cover for the diff, so I went to the junkyard and I found this baby. Okay, so I found this 240 in the junkyard. I'm gonna take the diff out of here because mine, the housing is broken on it. So same as last time, except now I don't have a jack. Okay, so after using some acrobatic moves to get those axles and drive shaft out, I'm about ready to drop the diff, but of course they don't rent jacks here and I didn't bring mine. So what I have here is a whole bunch of back seats from cars. And the plan is to basically, unbolt everything, just let it drop down and see what happens. Hopefully it works out good. So just like that, bang bang, it's out. Actually came down fairly gently, if I do say so myself. Basically, it was stuck up there and it started pointing downwards, like the drive shaft end of it was downwards, and it was only hooked in by the stubs of the axles. So then, because of that, it was almost basically already touching the cushion, and then I just wiggled it a little bit to basically take out one of the axles. As soon as I took out one of the axles, dropped over here and dropped over there, and then done. So it's good, no damage or anything. And what I did was I ended up buying the whole entire diff just to have as a spare anyway, since I was taking it out just to take the back cover off. But basically, I'm only gonna need the back cover off of it. Then same thing as my old diff, cleaned it up, took off the back cover. Yeah, so apparently that's what the holes here on the side are for. Go figure. Yeah. Everything's the same. Alright, so here is where the puzzle solving is at. So if you're going to pay attention to like one part in the video, it should be this one part, just so you can see what exactly happened. Okay, so I sanded down the back housing with 220 grit sandpaper and a sanding block to make sure that the surface was more or less flat when sanding it, so I didn't get, imperfections and then cause it to leak. But this is a cleaned cover. See it? Nice and smooth. No old gasket left on here. This is good and ready for RTV basically. As far as the surface, all I have to do is just wipe it down with some paint thinner or mineral spirits. Okay, now the old one that was leaking, it was leaking from this bolt hole. Okay, and I looked and I was like, well, there's RTV around it, but if you actually look, the old gasket is still on there. Okay, so basically he didn't take the time to remove all the old gasket. And then when he put the RTV on there, of course it didn't seal properly around there, and that's why that one bolt hole was leaking. You see, like around here, only the old gasket was around here, so it still had a good place for RTV to go around the bolt hole, which is why it didn't leak. For this one, however, the previous owner, whoever did this really, just didn't take their time, and then that's what you get. So, yeah, and then also, as far as what happened here, there is the, like the main gear in the differential is spinning right here, of course. You can see like this little streak mark. That's where it basically turns. So when we open up the diff, we found two pieces of weld in there, little balls of weld. Okay. So what I believe to have happened, you can see this one even has a flat spot on it. Okay. Was basically one of these pieces of weld got sucked up in between the main gear of the differential and this back casing right here. So basically got drug up, and then that's where it had all these scoring marks down here. And it slid against here. And then as soon as the tolerance became really close between the gear and the back housing, the weld, of course, had nowhere to go, and the gear was, of course, turning, and that thing isn't even going to break. So the only thing to go was this, aluminum backing right here, which is why I got to a point where it got really close, and then bam, I'm assuming, and then it blew a chunk out the diff right there. So right now I'm gonna put this casing back on the old diff, and you know, hopefully everything goes well, because these two pieces of loose weld aren't going to be inside of that diff anymore. Okay, so I just sanded down this little front plate on the diff in order to get it clean, just like I did on that back cover right here. And because there's some little bit of shavings in there as well as some RTV, I'm going to be pouring some oil in there and then just spinning around the diff just to clear all the gunk out of there that was basically just fell in there from when I was sanding all this down. Then I'll drain it out. Then after that, it would basically be time to put on the back plate. Alright, so what I would do in order to clean the diff was take gear oil, put it inside the diff, then, you know, turn the diff, get all the gears moving, and then dump out the oil. Then once the oil is dumped out, I take the magnetic drain plug from the diff, swirl it around in all the oil that came out, and that would pick up all the metal pieces. I'd, you know, take those all off and then put the oil back in, repeat the process until there was basically, you know, more or less, there was no more metal coming out and the diff was good to go. Now, on top of that, the diff was already welded. And when they welded it, they didn't clean off the weld spatter inside. So there's all this weld spatter inside that was still loose and you could pick off with like a screwdriver. So that's exactly what I did. I went ahead, took a screwdriver, etc. And I just poked at all the weld spatter in order to get it off, so that way any potential loose pieces of metal, well, were taken out of the diff now. And yeah, so more or less I just repeated that process and then got the diff pretty much clean. So basically you can see all the pieces of metal on there. Here though is where it's just like absolute carelessness. Now, I'm not an expert welder, okay, or really know too much about welding, but I'm pretty sure this right here is the welding filler rod right here. Okay, I don't know, I might be wrong, but it's in a wire shape, it's covered with weld right there, and I'm pretty positive that's from welding. So this whole piece was just lying inside the diff. Like, are you kidding me? Got the usual metal pieces like this big, and little specks and stuff. And those two big ones that I had already pulled out before. Diff has been washed, I guess you could say, and we're ready to assemble everything now. So I'm gonna rub the surface with some alcohol. You can also do like mineral spirits or paint thinner. All right. As far as the RTV I'm going to be using, it's going to be Ultra Gray by Permatex, of course. Ultra Black you can also use. Ultra Gray. I'm just using Ultra Gray mainly because it's for high torque application, and these need to be tied into 40 foot-pounds of torque. I'm probably not even going to do that. I'm probably just going to tighten it to whatever I feel like is tight enough. But still, it's just good to have in this situation. I think the Ultra Gray over the little bit softer black. So that's why I'm going with the Ultra Gray. Alright, now as per instructions of the, of course, a lot of people that don't even read this, they just go ahead and do whatever. But on the back, supposed to basically hand tighten it, and then after that wait an hour, and then you can tighten it another quarter to a half turn. Okay, so after waiting about an hour, I tightened up the bolts another quarter to a half turn, and basically now the diff was ready to get put into the car. So before it was going to be put into the car, I filled it up with fluid, like 1.5 liters, again with fluid, and then already tightened it up on the ground. So that way all I had to do is lift up the diff, bolted back in, and I was good to go. Didn't need to put any more fluid in or anything. Alright, now let's put it in the car. And then bam, it's in. Alright, so that concludes episode 7 of the drift car build. Now, here's a little conclusion to this. So, if whoever welded this diff or whoever assembled this diff were to have taken 15 more minutes of their time, right? 15 minutes. All they had to do was clean off any weld spatter that was inside the diff after welding, you know, take out all the chunks like I did, which doesn't take long if it was already done right there, okay? And number 2, clean off the old gasket, okay, on the back cover of the diff. It would have never had an oil leak. So it would have never had an oil leak, and it would have never broken off or broken the back cover of the diff. So basically taking 15 minutes back then when they were welding it would have saved me a trip to the junkyard. I believe the diff was $50 or $70, and that was on half off day. Alright, of course, all the gear oil. I'd say probably about 10 hours of my time minimum. It took 2 hours to take out the diff. I'm pretty sure it might have taken 2 hours or maybe even a little longer to put it back in, as well as all the cleaning, etc. So 10 hours of my time, all just because one guy couldn't spend an extra 15 minutes. So 15 minutes versus me spending, I think, $70 on the diff, okay, going to the junkyard for the day, 10 hours worth of my work. So 15 minutes versus all of that. So simple, and yet, like, why, man? Why? Ridiculous, man. Alright, so if you like the video, of course, give it a like. If you have any comments or questions or anything like that, go ahead and leave a comment or send me a message, and I can go ahead and respond to you. Mostly any questions. You know, if you're just leaving a statement, I usually won't reply to you, but I do read them all. Just note that. Also, if you want to keep updated on the builds or any other stuff that I'm going to be posting, you can go ahead and subscribe as well. So, right now, I'll see you guys in the next episode, and yeah. Oh. 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 Open a diff.